Hey folks, you're listening to the Idea Roastery. Jason, have you seen the release video by Donut Labs that was released right before CES 2026 about their new battery?
I did see it, and it kind of reminded me of a lot of the Y Combinator startups that like the kind of quality and the like flashy like between different scenes and the sort of visual effects. Like at first glance, I think I'm quite easily persuaded by good graphics. So I was like, wow, this is it. I'm like, we're like, this is the future, and I was quite amped about it for 2026. But I think, yeah, doing a little bit of further digging and also thinking back to the last like sort of big major scare, which was like, I think it reminds me a bit of like, was it LK-55 or like
Yeah,
the
this
the
room temperature
superconductor?
superconductor. Yeah,
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 where everyone was like, oh my God, this was like huge. But it did like blow up on Twitter. I saw it briefly, in a way that kind of reminded me a bit of like startup hype. But yeah, it looks pretty promising. I know you're a little bit more deeper into the technology side of batteries and EVs, so I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are.
yeah. Well, I think you're right in that we're all very skeptical of these kinds of claims, and there's always a lot of vaporware going around.
To start with, maybe the claims, I think. It's basically like a battery. And in the video, they showed us like it appeared that it was already deployed in like one sort of EV motorbike company, if that's correct. There were claims of like the one that like stuck out to me was that it doesn't require any like dodgy materials that are acquired through these like, Congolese mining operations that we see as part of the sort of downsides of, I think it's both lithium and cobalt that go into batteries. So I thought that was like quite compelling. There were a few others around like the longevity. I think it's like cycles. What else was there?
Well, so I think a good way to think about it is we can compare it to what is currently the sort of gold standard for EVs and grid storage, and that's lithium ion batteries. Sure, you've got like lithium iron phosphate batteries, which don't have the same fire risk as lithium ion, but with the trade-off of them being a little bit less energy dense. And then there are a couple of other things that are similar, like sodium ion batteries, which are similar to lithium ion, but they also don't come with the fire risk, again, at the expense of energy density. So what makes this announcement fairly interesting, and we'll get into why everyone should remain a little bit skeptical for the meantime, is that their energy density is claimed to be 400 watt hours per kilogram. Now keep in mind that lithium ion batteries currently have about 250 to 280 watt hours per kilogram. So this is claiming about a 60% increase. It is also a solid state battery. So you get liquid electrolyte batteries, which is what we're usually used to. And then you've got semi-solid state batteries, but no one really regulates what semi-solid state is, but it's generally a percentage of the electrolyte is liquid, a percentage of it is solid. Donut Labs claims that this is a fully solid state battery, which means that there is no liquid electrolyte, which means that you don't have the problems with what are called dendrites, which are these growths that happen that potentially link the anode and the cathode, causing shorting, which is why they can claim such a large cycle life.
I think it's like that science experiment at school where you have like salt and you try and make like a battery and you get like this real buildup of salt on the one side, right? It's kind of
Exactly,
a bit like
exactly.
that. So except this is maybe a different material, but after a while it causes like short circuits, which is what I guess is degrading the battery over
Yeah,
time.
exactly. And then they also claim what is essentially an infinite number of cycle lives. So they claim 100,000 cycles, whereas lithium ion is about 1,000 to 3,000 cycles. So potentially a 100-fold increase in the lifetime of the battery with, again, these are all claims, a 5-minute charge time from 0 to 100%, whereas lithium ion is between 20 and 40 minutes and it's typically limited to about 80% charge. And then they also have claimed that it operates from negative 30 degrees Celsius to 100 degrees Celsius without any issues, whereas lithium-ion batteries, if they go below zero, there's a pretty big range loss. And then finally, the essentially what you said about the material is they claim that it's lower cost than lithium-ion and that it's from the green, abundant, non-geopolitical materials, but it is proprietary, and they haven't let anyone else in on that, because you know that if they've made a pretty big breakthrough, that like CATL or someone else is going to start manufacturing those batteries quick sticks, because again, this battery, what they're claiming is better than what other battery manufacturers have said would be available in the 2030s, but they're saying it's available now.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess this is where it gets into the weeds, right? Where it's like available now, as in, I guess the challenges with that phase of the startup or phase of business is like, yeah, it's in production, meaning what? Like they produced 100 or they've produced 1,000, because the other factor of it, which I was quite interested in, is that it's a European company, which is quite unusual for this kind of technology, and there's a lot of like doomerism around EU in general. But the previous sort of golden child for electric batteries and vehicles was Northvolt, and they actually went under. And the reason they did that is because they really struggled to scale up. So I think from my side, I guess the skepticism comes into it might be in production to a couple of, niche use cases, but would they be able to scale to meet demands of, for instance, VW, Volvo, all those kind of European players?
So again, it's one of those things where it's like big if true, and why I think we're having this conversation as opposed to with General Vapor, where we'll say like, oh, you're saying that this will be available in 2029. Well, we'll see. They have set up factories to produce these, and Verge Motorcycles, which was an independent company, who had already featured the longest range electric motorcycle in the world. They won a Guinness World Record for the longest range ridden on a single charge. Their new Verge motorcycles are going to be powered by these batteries starting in 2026, like starting right now. And they're even upgrading all of their back orders to go from lithium ion to these new solid state batteries by Donut Labs. And so the interesting thing about it is that, those motorcycles are busy shipping, or at least that motorcycle company has shipped motorcycles. We know that for a fact. And they have come out and said, our new motorcycles are shipping with these from Q1 of 2026.
But how many do they sell, dude? It's not like Suzuki.
No,
Like,
it's true. It's true.
it's like I've barely even heard of this company before that launch. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like, like the Ariel Atom came out once. It was like this,
I
almost like
remember
a
that.
kit car,
Yeah.
but it was super fast and like power to weight ratio was insane. But it was like, yeah, it would have cost you like £100,000 or something like that, and like you never really saw it on the road, or was like a real like, oh my God, there's an aerial atom. But I feel like it's the same class as this motorcycle company. It's like maybe quite niche, maybe within Finland or wherever they are based, it might be quite prevalent. But I guess in terms of I like the technology is great, but I think the impact, like when are we going to feel that impact of this technology? Because if it is proprietary, then we're basically all sitting on our hands waiting for them to scale up, which is, I
Yeah.
guess, maybe where a lot of skepticism comes in. When it comes to like I guess the video is always a bit like it's like an Apple kind of like, you can forget about oil now. We've solved this problem, buddy. You know that meme where he puts his hand on your shoulder. He's like,
Yeah,
"It's
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
guy. You can put down your shovels now."
That's
And
exactly it. So if all of their statements are true, right? Which again, lots of skepticism, but if they are all true, this actually does change things. And I do use capital letters in that statement, because also a lot of the weight and complexity that goes into lithium ion batteries is the cooling system, because it has to be cooled while in use. Otherwise, it overheats, and then you have thermal runaway, and you have a car that is burning on the side of the road that can't be put out. And also, I know it sounds like they've claimed that their material costs are lower than lithium ion, but that doesn't necessarily mean the manufacturing costs are lower than lithium ion, which is a good point over there. And one of the things that has made lithium ion batteries so cheap over the last 30 years isn't the material cost. The material cost has roughly stayed the same. It's been how efficient we've gotten at the material supply lines as well as the manufacturing of those batteries. But I'm cautiously optimistic, mostly because I'm also, a sucker for a well-produced video by a European man telling me how their battery is really sweet. I think another thing that is also in their favor is that they did make a motor that everyone was very skeptical about its power to weight ratio, and they shipped it, and it's in supercars today. I think that's a very good example of, the Ariel Atom thing, though, is that because they also hold the proprietary tech over there, they don't just lease it out to anyone. It would be really nice if those lightweight motors found their way into like a mid-tier VW. But no, they're reserved for, electric supercars.
Yeah, I guess moving into uh, if it is true that this is the new breakthrough technology, what do you think are the applications that you're most excited to see these batteries put into?
Well, so the two main things that come to mind are fairly straightforward, is grid scale storage and transport, right? Because with grid scale storage, you want cheap, abundant materials for making a hell of a lot of them, and you don't want to worry about keeping them cool and thermal runaway. And essentially what that does is it just evens out the intermittency of solar panels and wind and all the other renewables. One of the discussions I saw about this, they were implying that these aren't actually batteries as much as they are capacitors.
Yeah,
Right?
I saw that.
And we'll only know once some other people get their hands on it and really tear them apart. Yeah, and that will happen. If this is really a big breakthrough, is I completely understand why they're being very coy about even suggesting what one of those green, abundant, non-geopolitical materials are.
Yeah. I guess the guesses out there would probably be like I don't know, would it be like carbon nanotubes or something like that, or sodium? I guess it can't be sodium because sodium would have some liquid essence in it, I guess.
Well,
Or
so another interesting thing over there is that they talk about the form factor as being like flexible and modular. So I think they're suggesting that it. I think in their announcement video they said something along the lines of you could theoretically make the chassis of the car its battery, whereas with lithium ion you have to have those rolls of cells. So your guess is as good as mine. I have seen talk of carbon nanotubes for some kind of supercapacitor, but again, we'll have to see. But I think the big thing is that grid intermittency is already mostly solved by lithium ion. Like they're pretty much at cost parity with fossil fuels at the moment. If this turns out to be true and you can manufacture these for the grid, then it makes renewables a no-brainer, right? I think that's what this is if these claims are true, it makes a couple of things a no-brainer. Right now, electric cars are good, probably already better than internal combustion engine cars. However, there's still arguments to be made for the other side. If these come along and they say, okay, 60% reduction, 60% improvement in range, you'll have cars that are lighter, go over 1,000 kilometers per charge, and it takes 5 minutes to charge them, and they don't have a risk of bursting into flames, and they can operate in high temperatures and low temperatures, etc., etc. It's like this makes an electric car an absolute no-brainer. There is no reason why you would have an internal combustion engine car over an electric car that has one of these. It's just better in every way, except for making noise.
yeah, I guess it's like that's the whole point is that it's the promise of reducing energy costs, right? The power to store, like being able to store energy for longer periods of time and more energy means that we can have, especially, I mean, South Africa is like the main use case around grid storage is like the heat, right? So you have solar panel arrays that are usually out in the desert somewhere. And then if you want to have a battery right next to it, you kind of have to have some sort of cooling. And I think here in the UK, it's more the capacity because we have like lots of wind, maybe not the best solar situation, although that's probably increasing. But you get this like was it quiet nights where you've got like no energy and then you just need to be able to power through, the evening. So you need a lot more capacity to just store. And I'm optimistic that we've seen the trend in sort of solar and batteries as it is, and it's kind of almost becoming a no-brainer already. But yeah, this will just like push it into the next level.
Yeah,
Um,
I think what's interesting over there is that when we think about technological progress, most of these big these big technologies that influence our everyday lives, it was very much a gradual progress, right? It's like lithium-ion batteries. They were developed back in the 90s, but they just became significantly better and significantly cheaper over a 30-year period, right? And their price just went down, and their energy density just went up. It's rare but not unheard of for us to make a big leap at, just like one discovery makes a pretty big impact. And so there's another thing I was reading about this where someone was making the statement that everyone who is saying like, no, this is impossible because this is such a big performance increase that it's got to be vaporware. He makes the case that actually so many companies have seen the potential in solid state batteries for the last 20 years, and a lot of companies have made a lot of progress in this, and all the big battery manufacturers have research teams who are actively working on this, and all of them do have solid state or semi-solid state batteries in the pipeline. So it is inevitable for a functioning solid state battery to come out within the next 3 to 5 years. So it's not that unfathomable that it happens right now. It's not like the superconductor where it's like comes out of nowhere.
yeah, yeah. I mean, in terms of like marketing, like hit, it's basically like triggered every single battery enthusiast in the world, right? It's got like so many claims. I guess the question I have is, how does the calculus in your head now change because of this? I mean, assuming it is true and all that, like put aside the, skepticism, how does it change the calculus with regard to things like nuclear and other forms of renewable grid style storage? We talk about geothermal, like those kind of things. What is it? How does it weigh up now?
Well, so I think that this would cause renewable energy to also just be a no-brainer. I mean, like, renewable energy is currently already significantly cheaper than nuclear, right? Nuclear is great for baseline power, but theoretically, if you had a large enough solar system and you had a large enough battery array, you could create a non-intermittent system that, especially if there's not that much of a loss in charging and discharging. I think another one that's pretty big over here is that it would make a lot of distributed batteries make a lot more sense. So, instead of even having like a big grid storage system, every house could have their own version of what is essentially a power wall that is just clipped on there. This would remove the intermittency from the grid, and if the grid does go down for a bit, everyone's still powered on, etc., etc. I think for this, it doesn't really change the calculus that much. I think we should still be exploring nuclear and geothermal as much as we can, because while renewables do have their intermittency problems, even if that's fixed, we do also have the problem of like enough electricity generation for the land trade-off, at least with regards to solar. So I think, being able to drill some geothermal wells in the right places would go a long way. Or have like a small modular reactor that sits inside of your city without having to set up all the big transmission lines would be pretty neat. But I think this is definitely a big leap forward in terms of that. And also, like, I just bought myself a new pair of AirPods. I love AirPods. They've got great noise canceling, etc., etc. But I feel more and more like they're a disposable device because you can't open them up again. They're essentially a sealed system. So when the batteries degrade enough on my AirPods, they're essentially useless, right? And so theoretically, you could make these devices just be a lot more resilient. I mean, I know a lot of people, when they get a new iPhone, they'll use it until the battery starts degrading, and then they'll use that as the opportunity to get a new iPhone. Whereas if the battery never degrades.
Yeah, I've never thought about like these, I guess, second order effects of like things that die. Like how many times have you had to replace? I've had to replace my laptop battery like twice already. Like and that's well within the 100,000 cycles that are proposed by the donut company. I guess also, yeah, like the land trade-off. I also think that's an important one because I think also within cities, yeah, solar seems like the most efficient and make there are darker towns and stuff who are in these like valleys in Sweden, in Switzerland and Sweden where like they don't get a lot of sunlight, so you do have to have some sort of transmission. So I think yeah, like having a multi-pronged approach, but also I think we kind of need these leaps still because the energy demand is expected to increase by something like 40% by 2030
Mostly
over
because
the
of the
next
data
10 years.
centers.
I mean, that's like data centers are meant to be like 10% of that, right? The other side is
Okay.
like air conditioning, right? Because you can think of like China's obviously modernizing, India's modernizing, Africa's modernizing. UK is like effectively banned AC, but once there's a few too many hot summers, I'm sure they'll also be wanting that. And so I think a lot of people I find are maybe, and I feel like I'm prone to this is like you feel kind of like we need to sort out our energy demands of today. And this is maybe goes to like the whole like doomerism around energy. Like, why do we need so much energy? Why don't we just like save more, right? It's like we're kind of struggling today, and we all know that people's minds struggle with exponential growth because, in a year's time, we might have no energy because people want to have AC. It becomes like a standard, or you have to have it because, the temperatures have gotten so high. The data center side is part of it, but I feel like, yeah, like, solar at the home could potentially mitigate some of those. We don't quite know where AI is going to go, but yeah, like the demand is insatiable, and we almost need these breakthroughs because it's like we're struggling as it is now. Even parts of like the US are having like brownouts. So it's definitely in demand.
That's one of the things that China does really well is, they'll be making like a massive bridge construction in what is effectively a rural area. And people are like, why are you spending what is essentially several billion dollars on building this giant bridge so that, 4 farmers can deliver their hay slightly more expediently? And it's like, it's not actually about the 4 farmers right now. It's about the potential for this place in the future. It's why they're also building so many power stations. Is they're like, it's not necessarily to meet demand right now. It's to meet the demand in 10, 20, 30 years time.
Yeah, it kind of has got me a little bit nervous about the UK's energy policy because they've very much gone down the like basically only renewables, even though like Rolls-Royce is developing SMRs like up in the Midlands somewhere. Um, because it's like, yeah, okay, the electricity prices are already expensive now. Okay, fair, they haven't built many houses, so that like we're not expecting housing to go up, so maybe that is a bit of a factor. But I think at some point, it's going to be like we kind of need like nuclear, or when you can't, because it's just like the growth is so much and people's demands are so much, and a lot of people are worried about that. I think in South Africa, at least solar is so viable that like there's no reason why you can't just have a solar panel on every roof. But yeah, I think I'm very excited about it. I think yeah, we'll. It's always like it seems like at the beginning of the year, there's always these like big breakthroughs that kind of get everyone like hyped up. It's either
Yeah.
that or like World War III. So I feel like there's always those two narratives at play.
So the date to look for, it's March 2026, or when the first of the Verge motorcycles are delivered. And so we'll just make a note that we'll report back in March 2026 that this was either vaporware or this is actually an industry-changing, defining moment.
Would you order one? Would you order one?
Oh, straight up, I would.
Maybe just for like people who are not aware, like what is the EV situation in Cape Town in South Africa? Is it like, is it even viable? Do you have, I guess with such a quick charge time, you probably could just plug it into the wall and no one would really know.
Well, sort of. So the quick charge time really requires that you have a high-speed charger, right? Because your 230, 240 volt wall outlet will take a while to charge your car. I mean, if you plug it in overnight, yeah.
I'm talking about a motorbike, dude.
Oh yeah, motorbike. Yeah, dude. Plug that into the wall. There are actually quite a few electric bikes and scooters kicking around Cape Town right now. I'd say about a third of the Uber delivery riders are on, and they have hot swappable batteries. That there are these like what look like lockers at petrol stations where they just go and they swap the battery out.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so it's coming.
That's cool because I think we spoke about it on the podcast like a few years ago that you saw it in Indonesia or something like that, and
and now it's here and it's cracking on.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to look forward to, and I think it's also a good podcast to start with, a little bit of optimism.
A little bit of optimism.
And hopefully we can continue to have more optimism throughout 2026.
For sure.